Howdy, folks. I've got a treat for you today. I've got a short clip. Well, I shouldn't say a short clip. It's actually the bulk of the video. It's like 20 minutes long, but it is a clip nonetheless of my process for turning an adventure into a grand campaign and explaining how I turn this adventure into something that requires or is best run with multiple referees, multiple play groups, and how it naturally fits in, it kind of slots in with each other's games in a shared campaign world. Y'all don't have a lot of context for this. It will make sense if I hopefully release the video later today, but just in case, I'm just hedging my bets and releasing this one now. So enjoy this description of the aftermath of an adventure investigating a serial killer who turns out to be a vampire, and the bodies, the infected bodies he sent outwards from the port city he's been preying on. Without further ado, enjoy. Alright, as you can see, I have my Foundry server loaded up here. This is what I use for my Chill Mist Valley campaign, and I thought I'd use it to demonstrate how I would connect the disparate elements that I've mentioned in the video thus far to draw point A to point B, how I would implement it in my current home game, or I guess you could say my online game, and most importantly, how I would expand on these elements and use them to expand the campaign world, start divvying up materials to other potential referees, other potential groups of players, get an online game going, if I was just starting from this one port city. Now, as mentioned, we're going to start with a hamlet that is outside the port city. So maybe, let's see here, I have some swamplands that are nearby, I have plains, and I have a forest nearby that. I think of swamps as being inherently more difficult than just going through a regular forest, so I think I'm actually going to start with the forest as our starting hex. So I'm just going to make a small little note on the map. Here we go, I have a particular Foundry module for this. And we'll pick out a hamlet name. We'll call it, let's see here, this is supposed to be near the sea, but it's also in a, we'll call it Marlsborough. Marlsborough. Alright, we have our small town of Marlborough, which the players will traverse from in order to get to the port city of Morellon. And this is stuff you guys are familiar with already. However, after the adventure's conclusion, depending on which of the two forks your players took, the surrounding area is going to suddenly become a lot more important. So my recommendation in the video was for a total of 6 bodies to be outgoing from the port city of Morellon, and I would expect that your players are probably going to catch about 3, maybe 2, maybe 4 at the most. They're certainly not going to catch all 6. And more importantly, if they do catch all 6, they're not going to be aware of what these bodies' purposes are. So we're going to start plotting out some destinations for them. First of all, we're in a port city, so we're absolutely going to take advantage of that. We're going to say that Morellon goes around and maybe ship something very far off, and we'll use we'll just use a little hamlet that we'll put here. We'll just call it, let's say, Zero Village mission. Default for, we'll say, Observer for all players, and this will make things a little bit easier. Call it Shiro. We're going to add a little icon. Village. Not going to worry too much about the trappings of it at the moment. And this village is going to be one of the targets for the bodies. And if this one happens to escape the player's notice, it's going to be relatively isolated and it's fine, but only for a little while. At some point, a whole bunch of vampires are going to get off this island and travel elsewhere, maybe up to this section of the map that they otherwise might not have a lot of reason to adventure in. There's not many quests out here. It's mostly open space so that I can develop quests like these. Now, Morellon isn't just a port city because it's on the side of a bay, obviously. It's also right on top of a river, which is not represented on this map, but I have a whole bunch of locations that are somewhat nearby the river, because it stretches all the way across the entirety of this map. But let's see here, I could probably get away with ejecting two bodies going up the river, one to a relatively close location, the other to a location far away. Let's just use two locations that I have on the map so far. This one's relatively close to the river. It's the Equine Academy. This is a mage college that is focused on spells that have to deal with animal husbandry, which affect mounts, and riding, war mages that can ride on their own mounts, horses, war elephants, giant eagles, maybe dragons, stuff like that. You could also equip and purchase magical cavalry from places like this, or just buy magical mounts for yourself. If you really want a hippogriff, it's probably going to be this place. And I think a vampire showing up would be pretty good adventure fodder to either, if the players are already way up here, to drag them back down, because my player is going to be higher level. Your players are ostensibly going to be low level, so this is an excuse to drag them up. And after that, so that's pretty good for a close location that is really, really far by land, but by boat, this is assuming it's like traveling all day, or maybe all day and all night. This would probably only be a couple-day journey based off the equivalent of steamships that are pulling these boats around. They're not really steamships, they're like the Wormingers from the Dying Earth, specifically the Kugel Saga, where two giant whale-sized worms are used to pull, along with some bait, the boat along. I think that's what they use to travel up and down this river, so it's pretty speedy and pretty convenient, given that you got the equivalent of the Mississippi, and then smack in the middle of this valley is the equivalent of the Mediterranean. We wanted one further location. Let's see here. We do have the Isle of Dread. I just marked this as the Isle of Dread because I figured if I wanted to plant other modules into my campaign or into my module, I could do so. These little islands in the middle are perfect for that sort of thing, and the Isle of Dread is supposed to be sort of trans-dimensional. Like, it's not always supposed to stay in one place, so who cares if it shows up in the middle of the Mediterranean here? But at the same time, I'm a little bit more attracted by the prospect of sending these to more populated areas, because I already have one that's sort of out of the way down at the bottom of the map there. So I think it's going to go to another town, a level 3 settlement by the name of Bronlock. It's just a word that means like on the shore of a lake. And coincidentally, in my campaign, this tends to be the area where a lot of my player characters hang around. There are other settlements nearby that do trade with Bronlock. There's the Glade of Eternal Midnight, which you can't actually see on the campaign map. There's the Banyan Cairn, which is an elf settlement that's sort of hidden between worlds, but they still do business and merchant-like trade with the regular prime material. And again, not too far away, a sizable distance by land, but nevertheless, they're mages, so they tend to get around a little bit more quickly than we're used to, is the Glassblowers Academy. This is a mage college that's focused on, stained glass magic, stuff that's just themed around the concepts of glass and glass that looks pretty. Surprisingly fertile ground for developing new spells and new magic, insofar as my inspirations were concerned. So once the vampire gets here, if it gets here, and if it has time to spread, I think that Bronlock is the perfect seeding ground for it. Well, that's 3 so far, and I do have 2 settlements right here on the map to begin with. I have Morellin. I could say that one of the bodies stays in Morellin. It just gets shipped from one part of the city to the other, or I could say that it goes out to port, goes out on a boat as a contingency, and at some point gets brought back to shore, back to the port city, when the vampire is probably properly gestated, if you will, and is ready to spread its corruption. I could similarly say that number 5 goes to Marlborough. Yeah, I think I like that idea. I think number 5 will go to Marlborough. And then for 5th, I'm just kind of using this as an excuse to mark it on the map because I haven't yet and really need to. I have another elf cairn that needs to be deployed somewhere around here. So we're going to say Observer, think this is the Hycelian cairn. It's a cairn. Most of the cairns, all of the cairns, with one exception here, are owned by wood elves, or woad elves as they're called. Some of them have elves of the deep as a sizable side population. Some of them have halflings as a sizable side population. This is the one exception, as it primarily belongs to elves of the high seas, or high elves. And we're also going to give this a nice blue tint. There we go. I had to do a little bit of searching, which I cut out to actually find the map token that I wanted to use. There's something a little weird to me about setting a vampire to an elf cairn. I'm sort of the mind, I don't know if this is an old school holdover, but I'm sort of the mind that I don't really want elves turning into vampires. I feel like vampirism is kind of like a human disease. It's a people disease. And sort of like, I'm pretty sure this was an old edition, but if you got vampirism or lycanthropy as a dwarf or elf, you would just die. I sometimes make exceptions for deep elves, because I kind of like the idea that because they live underground, because they were cursed, because, I mean, they live in the world below, their physiology has changed to be a little bit more malleable, that they can adopt certain human diseases. That's kind of fun to me. And also, if you spend all of your time many, many miles beneath the surface of the Earth, you don't really have to worry about sunlight all that much. So a lot of the disadvantages that are afforded to vampires who live on the surface don't really affect people living underground, except if adventurers are coming well equipped to deal with drow who already do not like sunlight, they're going to be extra effective against drow vampires, so that's probably a good thing. I think that's like a feature, not a bug. There we go, so the Hycelian Cairn. So those are the 6 places that these bodies are going to be going to. Now, as we know, probably not all of the bodies are actually outbound, and 2 of them, at the very least, are going to be localized to this area, an area that the GM is presumably the referee, having run this first adventure, is already a little bit more familiar with. And probably bodies are going to go out to 2 other locations. And these are the ones, at this point, that the referee who handled the very first adventure is going to find 2 of his friends, or maybe 2 of his players, 2 of the people that he actually played with, and say, listen, I need you to run a session for other people at the Hycelian Cairn. Here's the brief rundown. It's an elf village or town that kind of exists between here and the Woad, between here and the Feywild. It's mostly elves of the high seas, so it kind of counts as a port. And a boat arrived that had a vampire on it recently. It's just gestated, and now people are going missing, people are feeling ill, they say that the town is cursed, and everybody's panicking. And you go to another friend of yours, and you say, listen, I need you to run this remote jungle island village that was, let's say, that was blessed by a Lord of the Fae who's obsessed with love and attraction and lust, and this particular island is actually cursed to draw in ships around it that constantly wreck on the island, except in very rare circumstances. There's specific places that you could go where you will not wreck, but that is mostly only known to the islanders, and they're not particularly keen on stopping people from wrecking. They don't really mind all of the free loot that comes to their shores, and they have a way to teleport out of here onto the mainland. They have a secret about that. So something is going to wash ashore their fair village that's a little bit too greedy and somewhat cursed already, and people are going to begin disappearing. So I need you to run that scenario for 5 friends or 5 people online or whatever that you can find, and report back to me on what happens. And all of a sudden, even just with 3 main regions or 3 main locations, all of a sudden you have developed this web that is in immediate need of additional referees and immediate need of additional players to run in the most fun fashion that you can think of. You could run a game like this on your lonesome. Some of you could run a game like this on your lonesome. Is sort of like the key distinguishing factor. I can run a game like this on my lonesome, but I'm eventually going to get burnt out running for how many people do I have? If I go to user management here and click new player, what am I going to come across? Let's see, we're going to go to user management, and we're going to scroll all the way down. Look at how long I have to scroll. We're going to click additional, create additional user. What does that say? Player number 66. That's too many for a first-time GM. And I don't really want you to work up to the point where you feel like you can take on 66 players at once, or even not all at the same time, but throughout the, accommodate them all in the same campaign. I would like to do something, or I would like to demonstrate to people a method of playing and a method of structuring your campaigns such that anybody can do it. And as it turns out, maybe not in the tabletop RPG space, but I'm relatively confident, I believe in my viewers at the very least, the people watching this video, that you guys can find two other friends to run a game with you. And they can find a bunch of other friends or people online to run and play in a shared campaign world where some of those players take on the burden or responsibility. It's not much of a burden if a whole bunch of other people are doing it. Atlas only had the right to complain because he was doing it alone. If he just had a little bit of company, he'd be fine. So not the burden, but the responsibility of running, and some of the players are going to step up and take that on, maybe just for a one-shot. Maybe one of the players says, we're going to have run a little one-shot about a vampire heading up north and maybe dominating a village of lizard men, and we're going to have a bunch of level 1 characters, and we're just going to see what happens. We're going to see if anything comes of it. Not too high investment, but it is potentially going to drive the scenario forward. And that'll give the people who were acting as referees to begin with a chance to play. And all of a sudden, being a referee is no longer this massive ask where you're going to be abandoned with the full weight of the world on your shoulders. That's something that not everybody is going to step up to the plate for. That's something that not everybody wants to do. That's not something that everybody can do. But this campaign structure, which is easy to start on your own, easy to collect other people to reinforce, and an easy sale as to why you would want to play in a campaign like this, is something that anybody can do. I'm fairly confident. We just need a few of, not the rails. God, what a silly, that carries a special connotation in our community. Just laying the foundation or laying a schematic for how normal people who are just like you or I can do this seemingly impossible task where they collect multiple referees for a single shared campaign world and don't freak out about how their story is being ruined. If an individual thread of this already complex web that we've spun up together turns out to end in a dissatisfying or anticlimactic way, that's fine, because you have all these other threads that can still be pulled on, and maybe a few players drop from the campaign, but honestly, that's not really an issue to us. Those players could spin up their own threads in the campaign world. You could say, this didn't seem satisfying to you, that kind of sucks. Why don't you take, if you were so dissatisfied by this, why don't you take a region up north with a completely different premise, and occasionally we'll have a little bit of crossover, and we could share DMing resources so that you don't have to do this on your own, and you don't have to stop playing D&D. This is going to be a lot more satisfying. So we also have the solution to not just DM burnout, not just handling too many players, not having anybody to share the burden and turn it into a not burden, turn it into a responsibility with, to rotate outwards and enjoy some playtime on your own. We also have something of a solution to people being dissatisfied with the campaign and letting people offer their individual strengths, turn their complaints into gameable content that everybody can take advantage of and everybody can enjoy. So that's my pitch. I guess we should get back to the regular video script at this point.